And welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to feature this guest speaker because he's been so supportive of the APIDA Plus Center. My name is Dr. Nina Ha, and I'm the director of the APIDA Plus Center. We have been doing learning lunches since I first got here in 2019. And the reason why we do these learning lunches is because our students, or the students at the time, had asked me that, or told me that they didn't know any APIDA faculty members. And so this was a great way to actually introduce the faculty to students and vice versa. And it's also very informal, as you can see, with learning lunches. We provide the lunch. You better learn. But the only question that I ask the featured member is, could you just please share your personal and professional story into higher education? We've expanded it to include artists and community members too, so it also includes or into your profession of any kind. And it's up to the professor, the featured person, how they want to present themselves. So Dr. Marcus Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Marcus Johnson. I was trying to figure out where I could start and describing both my identity journey, personal journey, and career journey. It's as I was reflecting on it, I was like, okay, I've had an interesting, unique path in life. Born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, was raised in a suburb of San Francisco called Pacifica. Pacifica, if you see pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge and fog coming underneath the bridge, the fog is coming from my hometown of Pacifica, California. I think it's considered the foggiest place in the continental US. And so I grew up in the city of fog. African American father, Chinese American mother, one older brother. Growing up in the 1980s, along with my brother, I really thought at the time, I thought and continued to think that my brother and I experiences as mixed in the Bay Area was unique to us. Not that there weren't other people of mixed backgrounds growing up with, but there weren't celebrities, there weren't prominent figures that I would say were role models growing up. And that's actually an important part of my personal development journey, which I'll get to later on. But growing up, I really thought, okay, it's just me and my brother who can identify as Black and Chinese, and we really didn't think much about it. If any of you are familiar with the San Francisco Bay Area, there is, I would consider the San Francisco Bay Area to be a pretty diverse part of California, let alone the US. And also there was a sizable Filipino population next door to Pacifica, of Daly City and South San Francisco. So growing up, I went to, I would consider pretty mixed schools, still majority or predominantly white, but fairly mixed. Sizable Filipino population, as I mentioned. A lot of people, when they see me, people see a lot of different things. People make a lot of assumptions. They identify me as Filipino, Polynesian, and as I've grown older, if I travel anywhere, if I'm by a large body of water, people assume that I'm from there. So if I'm in the Caribbean, people think I'm Caribbean. If I'm visiting Spain or Portugal, people still think, oh, you must have grown up by the ocean or water. So anyhow, I think that it was interesting that I had a lot of Filipino friends openly accept me and welcomed me into the community, even though I didn't identify myself as Filipino. With amongst my own family, I enjoyed spending time with my African American family. I enjoyed spending time with my Chinese American family. But there were different interactions that I had with them. I would say that there were times in which my quote unquote blackness was tested by different family members. My Asianness was tested by different family members. And so I recognized even at an early age that my brother and I did not quite fit into any particular group. We didn't feel necessarily excluded, but we didn't feel that we fit. And so there were benefits and disadvantages to that. Which I like to highlight because the disadvantages are that I lack role models, or I lack people that I aspired to be. So if you could imagine the 1980s, we're still a decade plus away from Tiger Woods being a prominent figure. We're multiple decades away from the first vice president and presidential candidate of Black Asian descent. So again, I think that I sensed and I felt that my brother and I lacked models that we could aspire to. So that's a disadvantage. Another disadvantage is we didn't feel, again, like we fit into any particular group. And so there were times or periods of a sense of loneliness, which I think is a big disadvantage. Now, the advantage of being mixed was that because we didn't fit into any particular category, we somewhat had we had some freedom to explore and to do things and to carve our own paths. So in some ways, it's invigorating that, okay, we accept that there's not a group that we belong to or identify with, so we get to forge our own path. And in some ways that's exhilarating. And so I would say by the time I got to high school, I embraced that notion that I wasn't going to try to find a group or seek out a group to be a part of, that I'll make my own way. I was a athlete in high school, a track and field athlete in high school. Went to a rather prominent high school, predominantly white, Roman Catholic, all boys high school in San Mateo, California. To be an athlete at that high school meant a lot, at least at the high school. So if any of you heard of Juniper Serra High School in San Mateo, California, it's the home of Tom Brady, Barry Bonds, Len Swan. So to be an outstanding athlete at my high school, I think was a big deal. And also, this is before Tom Brady became Tom Brady. So I had some of his textbooks, and I'm like, oh, he was just drafted by the Kansas City Royals. Okay, he's not going to the Kansas City Royals. He's going to go to Michigan to play football. I'm like, all right. I didn't think much of it. But I was proud to be an athlete in high school. I ended up going to UC Davis for my undergraduate. Subject matter wise, I was interested in biology. The sciences, I always had an attraction to the sciences, and biotechnology was becoming a big thing in San Francisco. And so I'm like, oh, I'd like to go to UC Davis, or I want to go to college. I specifically want to go to University of California. I received a an academic scholarship from Stanford. And a lot of my friends were like, why aren't you going to go to Stanford? Stanford's like one of our best institutions in California. And I'm like, they're the wrong colors. They're not blue and gold. All the University of Californias are blue and gold. They're all research one universities. They're public. My academic scholarship to Stanford would not be enough to carry me through Stanford. I did not have Stanford tuition dollars. And so I was hell-bent on going to one of the University of Californias. They were the right colors, they were blue and gold. And I prefer to have, I would like to extend my track and field career. And so I was accepted into multiple University of Californias, but what attracted me to UC Davis was the coaching staff at UC Davis. So the coaches from the 1996 Olympics ended up taking positions at Berkeley and Davis. And I got some interest from UC Berkeley, but I really got the attention of the coaches at UC Davis. So I went to UC Davis. Now that matters because that plays into my career journey, actually. And I'll get to that. But I began my time at UC Davis as a track and field athlete, majoring in biotechnology. As a track and field athlete or NCAA athlete, I had to meet bi-weekly with my academic advisor. So all NCAA athletes had to meet with their academic advisors. And so bi-weekly, I would go in and I even remember her name, Gerda. Gerda would welcome me into her office and she would say, the first thing that comes out of her mouth every time I saw her was, what med school are you going to? And I'm like, you know me, you've seen me. I'm majoring in biotechnology. I enjoy biotechnology, but I don't have a desire to pursue med school. And her reaction always was, no, people who major in biotechnology go to med school. And so anyhow, I was frustrated by that, but like I said, enjoying myself in at least biology classes. And then because of my track and field experiences, because my coaches were the 96 Olympic coaches, they brought the Special Olympics and Olympic trials to Sacramento. And so now I'm exposed to Olympic hopefuls. I'm exposed to Special Olympian athletes. And I have opportunities to coach some Special Olympic athletes. I also have the opportunity to tutor my teammates and some Olympic hopefuls who were staying in the area. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed my tutoring experiences. I enjoyed my coaching experiences. And that's when I began to gravitate towards a subject called human development. So UC Davis did not have a school of education at the time. I knew that I wanted to go into education now, but I couldn't major in it. So I saw human development. They accepted all of my science credits, and I'm getting to do something that I'm beginning to enjoy. Now, I didn't quite have career goals at this time, but I knew that I wanted to do something in the realm of education, or continue my time in education. And so from Davis, I went to UC Irvine to get my teaching credential. If you know anything about Irvine, California, Irvine is a rather I would consider a rather affluent area, Orange County, California. I taught at Irvine High School. I can't remember how many students I had there, but I would say that at least 98%, if not 100% of my students in Irvine all wanted to go on to pursue higher education. all. And I knew that I also, for myself personally, I wanted to pursue a master's degree. Now, I could have stayed in Irvine, I could have stayed in California and pursue my master's degree in something education related. And it was educational psychology that caught my attention. So a lot of my colleagues were going into master's degrees in curriculum and instruction, which was good and fine. But I'll admit, stemming from my time as an athlete, I'm going to admit I had an ego. I still have an ego. That I didn't want to just know the subject matter. I wanted to be the best possible teacher I could be. And I thought that, okay, educational psychology, this is interesting. Will this allow me to get into my students' heads? Like, how can I influence or help my students? How can I motivate them? I desired that more than learning more about biology. So I ended up getting into an educational psychology master's program at UNLV. So Las Vegas, Nevada. What attracted me to Las Vegas, Nevada was, again, I have an ego. The professors in Las Vegas were like, hey, we're going to encourage you to engage in research, educational psychology research. And we're a prominent research faculty. And so I was attracted to them for that. So I moved from the ocean to the desert for my graduate studies. And I continued to teach. And if you can imagine now, I was teaching at Irvine, California. 98, if not all 100% of my students wanted to pursue higher education. To now finding myself at a Las Vegas high school, Desert Pines specifically. And out of 190 students on my roster, 190 students on my roster, maybe 3 of them expressed interest in going on to higher education. And so it was a huge difference. And if you recall, I was interested in, okay, how can I motivate students? How can I help students become their best possible selves? The motivations of my students in Irvine compared to Las Vegas, completely different. Right? So I'm working on my master's degree in Las Vegas. The faculty is encouraging me to get into research. And so I wanted to research student motivation. Once I got into research, I was hooked. I really enjoyed doing research. I ended up pursuing my PhD. And then my first position was at the University of Cincinnati. Why that matter? So University of Cincinnati had an influence on both my personal identity and career trajectory to where I am now. So I moved from the ocean to the desert for graduate school, from the desert to the Midwest for my first position. Cincinnati is a city that is 49% white, 49% Black. And you would imagine that, okay, that would suggest that you're a fairly diverse city. No. There's a lot of segregation in Cincinnati by neighborhoods. The university itself, I think is something like 8% Black faculty, not barely 8% of the faculty is Black. I actually do not have the statistics of those who would identify as APIDA in Cincinnati. But while I'm in Cincinnati, I'm a faculty member. I'm doing well in educational psychology. I get my first NSF grant, $1.2 million. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm doing good. I have a $1.2 million grant to explore, high school students' motivations, for STEM careers. And at the same time that I'm feeling great about myself, there are a couple things happening at the University of Cincinnati. One is, at the time that I got this grant, by the time I got this grant, three men of color were specifically three unarmed men of color died at the hands of campus police, not city police, but campus police on campus. And at the same time, I experienced I was considered a traumatic racial event where I was going to campus, and like I said, I'm feeling good about myself. I just got an NSF grant. And a truck drove by me, two white men in the truck drove by me, called me the N-word and threw a glass bottle at me. And completely tore my world apart. So as high as I was, I'm thinking to myself, I'm a professor at a Research One university. I just got an NSF grant. I'm doing great. Nothing can bring me down. And in an instant, my world was shattered. I did not know how to react or respond to this happening. By the way, I should have also mentioned the glass bottle that they threw at me didn't hit me, but was terrifying enough that I was shocked. So now we get to a point where I'm still at Cincinnati. COVID comes. And I would also say, I should have also said a little bit more about my research. My research is in an area called motivated conceptual change, which is about how do you motivate learners to overcome their misconceptions. And so in science, how do I motivate learners to overcome their misconceptions about the theory of evolution, or about the transmission and progression of infectious diseases? Now, this is before COVID comes, all right? So now COVID comes, and people are asking me, okay, do you want to apply your research to how do you motivate people to overcome their misconceptions now about COVID? And I actually said, no. COVID became too politicized of a topic that I didn't want to go into that. But also with the arrival of COVID was the murder of George Floyd. All right. And I had just mentioned that 3 unarmed men of color had died at the hands of campus police in Cincinnati. I knew that this was a possibility that I could be confronted with a potentially violent event myself. Even though I'm a faculty member, even though I'm doing good research, could be a threat on my life. And so with the murder of George Floyd, I began to think, okay, is there a way I could apply my expertise in motivation and conceptual change to efforts of social justice? And at the time, I couldn't. I was thinking, I'm like, okay, misconceptions in science and social justice, I don't know how to bridge those two. During the pandemic, there was an opportunity to apply to a position here at Virginia Tech. And I mentioned before, I have an ego. I still do. There were things happening at Virginia Tech that I knew the faculty and their School of Education were going places. And by the way, yes, Virginia Tech has a School of Education. I need to emphasize that. So there are people on the faculty who are doing tremendous things, and I think will garner national attention. And I'm like, I want to be a part of that. And I have the opportunity now to join Virginia Tech as a professor in educational psychology, wanting to continue my research in motivation and conceptual change. And then I would say, in addition to the George Floyd murder being something that inspired me, I get here to Virginia and we have a gubernatorial candidate who's dismissing critical race theory. We have other governors and politicians across the US also dismissing critical race theory. We have the governor of Florida then dismiss AP African American history in Florida. And along with these fights against critical race theory across diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, comes misinformation and misconceptions. And I was really angered by what was happening in Florida and seeing that, okay, there are misconceptions when it comes to racial histories. So now I could build a bridge from my research on motivation and conceptual change to misconceptions in racial histories. And I started to just explore what are some prominent misconceptions that people have about racial history. What are misconceptions that people have about African Americans and African slavery? What are misconceptions that people have about immigrant populations? What are misconceptions that people have about indigenous peoples? And so as I began to explore, by the way, I only just wanted to explore this idea. All right. Because I felt safe and at home. I'm like, okay, yeah, misconceptions in science, that's where I feel at home. I'm like, I feel good there. Exploring misconceptions now in social studies and in social sciences is potentially more complicated. So yes, there are emotional misconceptions that people have in science. So when it comes to, like I said, I did misconceptions on the common cold and influenza. So people wanting to take antibiotics to treat their cold or flu. That's a misconception. Yes, there are some emotional misconceptions about vaccines, but it wasn't really big like the misconceptions with COVID, or emotionally laden as the misconception about COVID. But with historical misconceptions, social studies misconceptions, the concepts that people have and hold on to actually become more emotional because they could be tied to people's identities. And so if we're talking about African slavery, if we cover African slavery in K-12 schools, what are the emotions that are felt by students of color? What are the emotions that are felt by majority white students? Confronting these emotions now, could I change people's concepts? Can I motivate them to overcome their misconceptions? Or are they going to hold on to the misconceptions because it's too much part of their identity? And so what started off as just an exploration grew into a project that is now called the Teaching Historical Racial Trauma Project. I've received some support from Virginia Tech libraries to make this project into a digital humanities project and to collect essays from historians, sociologists, advocates, educators. And it's grown into this enormous project. And now that I'm beginning to explore not just NSF grants, but now humanities grants, social science grants. And so it's I could not have gotten this project launched at Cincinnati. I'm convinced that I could not have gotten it launched at Cincinnati. Virginia Tech has the research infrastructure, has the connections, and I would say the culture to allow this project to happen. And by culture, what I mean is a research one culture of people here, as I just started to tell them about my curiosity for this, grew into this enthusiasm of, hey, Marcus, let me put you in touch with so-and-so at the APIDA Plus Center. Let me put you in touch with so-and-so in the history department or so-and-so in the sociology department. So there was a culture of moving this research forward. And like I said, that was not the case at Cincinnati. I don't think that would have been the case even when I was in Las Vegas. And so I feel quite fortunate to be here at Virginia Tech because I feel it was the right place, right time for this project to actually grow into what it's become. Long story, but that's my journey. That's been my personal and career journey of how I got from the West Coast to Blacksburg, Virginia. And I'm happy to share more about my research. I'm happy to share more about my identity journey, and wanted to open it up really for questions that people might have about either research, identity, personal and professional development.
One thing that struck with me was your research on changing motivations and perceptions of how we view problems.
Mhm.
And when you started discussing traumas, especially related to history and races,
Right.
it kind of reminded me of cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'm just curious of how yours is different or similar to that type of, I guess, I don't know if it would be
Yeah,
considered
so-
research, but.
So if there's overlap, mine would overlap more on the cognitive side of things. So I try to research what's happening cognitively for people to stretch themselves or for people to even feel comfortable being open to new and different information that they're typically not exposed to. The behavioral side of it, I haven't done much research on the behavioral side of it, but I'm getting into cognitive behavioral therapy for a different project. But as far as my research goes, I've stayed more on the side of cognitive, the cognitive side of things. And specifically have begun looking more at psychosocial variables. So self-regulation, people's ability to self-regulate, people's ability to even regulate their motivation and emotions, more so than the behavioral side of things. I'll extend just a little bit further. That's not to say, though, that the behavioral aspects aren't important, because I do think that they are. And they could be especially important when it comes to trying to figure out how can we start helping people heal from trauma. because there's I think it's called embodiment. Um, how do you feel yourself emotionally, personably, when confronted with reliving your trauma, I guess, and how can you control your behaviors or regulate your behaviors? So I just want to say I personally do more research on the cognitive side of things, but that's not to say that the behavioral side isn't worthwhile. It's still important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like a question, but you have a really unique story, and thanks a lot for sharing that. Do you have any initial results of how, according to you, like, do you have conducted any studies regarding how do these nuances of the bias that you mentioned, how are they deeply rooted in today's culture? Do you have any
Yeah, so
insights?
so my research, so my research, I'll tell you what my research findings suggest.
Mhm.
So my research findings suggest that when you make things more personally valuable to individual, that they're then more open to experience conceptual change. And what I mean by personal valuable, I mean so there are three types of values. There are probably more, but the three types of values that are researched are called utility value. So the how useful is something. There's an attainment value, which is how important is this to your identity. A third value is intrinsic value. How interesting is this? My research suggests that to facilitate conceptual change, you should emphasize the utility value of the topic. So when it comes to the common cold and influenza, motivating people and saying, hey, this is important to you because you're likely going to catch a cold or a flu in your lifetime, or you're going to be around somebody who catches a cold or flu in their lifetime. So there's a utility value to this content. That's what my research suggests and supports. But that's also specific to the subject matter of the flu and the common cold. I think that when it comes to other misconceptions, there might be other strategies that are likely going to be more effective to facilitate that change. But when it comes to the topic of the cold and influenza, I found that utility values seem to promote the most change.
Thank you again
Yeah.
for doing this, especially for being featured. I did have a question. So there are a number of students here as well as on campus who are mixed race. Mixed,
Yes.
and I was wondering what advice would you give them concerning your own journey? What sort of advice you would give them about sort of their identities and the salience of their identities going through not only academia, but also later on
Yeah.
in terms of professionalization.
So my advice is yes for those who have mixed identities, but also I think that it applies to everybody. Which is my advice is know that your identity is going to evolve. And it's okay to evolve. And what I mean by that is, okay, I recognize that my father's African American. I recognize that my mother's Chinese. If people ask me what as I was growing up, okay, what are you? I would just say, oh, I'm biracial. All right. and then, like I said, there were times throughout my life where my Chinese family tested my Asianness, my African American family tested my Blackness, and I didn't want to take sides. I also felt I didn't want to it didn't feel like I could be my authentic self, favoring one or the other. And so I moved away from a biracial identity to one that was, I would say, actually undefined, more exploratory. It wasn't until my mid-20s to late 20s that I actually embraced a multi-ethnic, multiracial identity. And I think regardless of your background, know that your identity is likely going to evolve. And it doesn't mean that you know, or how to say, identity, I don't think is stagnant. Even if you can definitively identify as Chinese or as Asian or as African or as indigenous, even the subtleties are likely going to evolve across time, because you're going to gain experiences across time, and you're going to change with those experiences. And so my advice to everybody really is, know that your identity is going to evolve, and it's okay that your identity evolves.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Sort of, I'm also mixed race. I'm half Indian, half white. How, like, you talked about sort of like the Asian side of your family testing out Asian or black side of your family testing out black or how do you like deal with like invalidation, like them invalid, like, or I don't know if it's like how
Yeah.
you or like or not, but like how would you recommend someone like deal with that side invalidating your membership that identity? Like,
Yeah.
your Indian, like my Indian side saying I'm not Indian enough, or my white
Right.
side saying I'm not white enough.
And so again, this is something that took me time to grow and to accept. I got to a point where I got fed up being tested, or you know, like or do I favor one family? And I got to a point where I just got frustrated, and I said, you know what? I'm not going to entertain this anymore. I'm going to accept that I'm me, and I'm not going to let other people categorize me, or try to categorize me. So that, yeah, so to directly answer your question, yes, I've had experiences where I felt that I was invalidated. But I reached a point where I said, I'm not going to allow others to try to categorize me, and I'm just going to embrace who I am. I can't change that I'm I'm half black and half Asian, and so but I accept who I am first. I think that there there's a natural desire to want to belong, to want to fit in, to want to be a part of a group. And I think that desire is natural. But I also think that it's important for everybody to, it gets to that cliche of know thyself, of not just knowing thyself, but accepting yourself first.
To piggyback off of that for a second, sorry, someone. What I also found interesting was your notion that, your research project wouldn't have been accepted at Cincinnati. And also that there's some, you were resistant to certain types of projects, but
Mhm.
then
Yeah.
later on, like sort of gave into it.
Right.
I know for sort of for researchers of color, especially when you do research in your own community, people think, oh, you're not being objective.
Mhm.
How do you sort of kind of negotiate that sort of that nexus of being invalidated by your peers or your like fellow researchers because you're not being rigorous enough because, you know, we get this in ethnic studies a lot in terms
Yeah.
of the fact that you're researching your own, so therefore.
It's almost like a me search.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you negotiate that
So,
tension?
so now this is where my ego comes back into play. So now, and like, I admit that I have an ego, but there's also a reason why, and that also ties back to my time as an athlete. I knew that I was going to be competing against Olympic hopefuls
Mhm.
and Olympians and elite athletes. And so I had to, I've always felt I've had to have a belief in myself that I can be competitive. And so with that ego coming to Virginia Tech, I still have an ego. And I recognize that I have privileges now. As a full professor with tenure, I've proven myself research-wise. I've proven that I have research chops. I'm a full professor. I have tenure. I have privileges and freedoms to now explore things that I don't have to be validated by others. I already proved to myself that I can do this. Now, when it gets to the rigorousness of this teaching historical racial trauma project, I say that the rigor also comes from the diversity of the project. And the rigor and the strength, what I mean by rigor and strength of the project and its diversity is there's racial trauma that everybody can identify with. And it's not just people of color. I'm like, every wave of immigration to the US has experienced trauma. So in every American's family history, there's going to be trauma there. And so I think emphasizing that to even majority, let's say majority white, who say, oh, this project is on racial trauma. I can't identify with it, and I'm like, dig deep enough and you will, and you don't have to dig far. It's maybe a century, maybe a century and a half that any Italian immigrant, any Irish immigrant, any French immigrant, there's going to be trauma there. So you don't have to dig far to find trauma in your own family. And so I when I express that to others, I think that this notion of oh, it's not, you know, the research isn't rigorous, or the research, it doesn't really inform me or my pursuits. And I'm like, it does.
I think like that also brings something up that I actually discussed with a former professor of mine when I said, oh, I'd love to research a certain topic, but I don't share that same identity. And she, I mentioned like that objectiveness would be good. And she posited that it would be better. You actually have more motivation if you're researching things that are true to yourself. To me, I would probably validate the research of Asian Americans done by Asian Americans more than someone who might be white,
Mhm.
right? Because I think there's a level of like understanding that comes with that. How would you perceive something similar to that as well?
So, yeah, so I think that, again, I have some privileges coming into this. I do not identify as, so when people ask, how do I identify, I do say multiracial, multi-ethnic.
Mhm.
I don't immediately go to Black and Asian.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for that, and it's because I know that my mother and father alone don't inform who I
Mhm.
am. And so I'm like, hey, if I dig enough into my mother's family history and my father's family history, I'm like, I feel with some confidence that I have a bit of blood from from everybody. Um, uh, and so that's why I identify today as multiracial, multi-ethnic, is because I do feel that I'm I'm also part of everybody.
Mm.
And so when I look at this project of teaching historical racial trauma, and I say, like, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's in everyone's family. Dig deep enough and you'll find it. I feel a sense of privilege that I can do this
Mhm.
because I'm multi-ethnic and multiracial. So I think that brings some value to the project, but that I don't have to just own one particular
Mhm.
area.
One last question.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you said that during your time in Cincinnati, you had the opportunity to study the pandemic and COVID with relation to your work,
I was
but
asked,
you
yeah,
chose not to because
Yes.
of the political nature that it was
Yes.
starting to take on. But when you came to Virginia Tech, you were able to dive into topics like critical race theory and perhaps like DEI,
Uh-huh.
things of that nature. And I guess with this polarization that we're experiencing now and just with the election season,
Right.
how are you able to navigate or distance your research topic from the political nature that it may be taking on?
I
Or
can't.
is that a tricky thing?
So I've tried to just be realistic about it. Recognizing as I applied for, let's say, a National Endowment for Humanities grant, that the grant that I'm pursuing wants to have, I want to create an institute for teachers to come to learn about historical racial traumas and how to teach it. And I know that there's teachers in some states that would not be allowed to participate in this institute. Now, my going attitude, which is, I'm going to admit, is not the right attitude to have. My going attitude has been, I'm like, okay, I just accept that there are going to be teachers from certain states that won't have an opportunity to participate in this institute. I say that's my attitude. I don't think it's the right attitude. I think that NEH says, no, we want you to find a way to be more inclusive, even for those in states that might be reluctant for their teachers to participate in this. So I'm like, okay, well, I can do that. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but I've accepted to a degree that, yes, this project is it's going to be political or politicized. And I think that today I have more confidence today, again, part of my ego, part of my privilege as a full professor, that I can do this today.
I know they're very delicate and sensitive topics and you might just bring out some type of emotional reaction depending on who you interact with.
Yeah.
I find that most folks are very empathetic and willing to listen, but Sometimes you just might strike the wrong person and it's, oh, this is a very socialist or progressive movement.
Mhm.
Why would you talk about this? There's no factual way of looking at it. It's promoting one race over another. And I'm like, that's
Right.
not how we engage in like this healthy dialogue to work through the issue.
Yeah, so, like I said, I was somewhat triggered to really put more effort into this project because of what's happening in Florida. And dismissing African American studies, for high school students there. And my thoughts and reactions are, that's political, but you're doing students in the state of Florida a disservice. And you're doing them a disservice by canceling AP African American history. One, you're closing it as an opportunity for high school students to engage in this curriculum. But you're also trying to erase or minimize the rich history of African Americans in Florida. And by doing that, you are also doing a disservice to, and I'm going to specify the governor. The governor is doing a disservice to his own history by promoting misinformation around this. Because like I said, I'm like, racial trauma is ubiquitous and it's in everyone's family. And when you try to dismiss it or erase it, you're doing a disservice to your students, you're doing a disservice to the citizens, because you're keeping them from an opportunity to better the system. And so I'm like, when you learn about history, and by the way, I'm a science geek.
Mhm.
And so, it's not till more recent that I've gotten into history. But I'm like, there's a value in history. That cliche of, if you don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat its mistakes. And I'm like, I think that's true. I think that if you are preventing somebody from learning a history, you're preventing them the opportunity to find a better way to improve their futures.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop recording right now.